breast. And that form of calcium is associated with breast cancer that is malignant. And it does seem to link to the fact that major mortality from breast cancer is not caused by the breast cancer itself, it's the metastasis to the bone, which is primarily composed of calcium hydroxyapatite. So you start to, in other words, get mammary cells that express proteins and minerals that are identical to what happens in the bone. And my assumption is that calcium supplements are contributing to this. And that's generally called ectopic calcification. So if calcium that you're taking for your bones ends up going to someplace other than the bones, let's say the arteries forming that calcium cap on top of the atheroma, they call it, that buildup of plaque. The last stage, most dangerous stage, is when calcium starts to form, which happens to be calcium hydroxyapatite, same form found in the bone and in breast cancer. Then it can become brittle, break off, and cause a stroke or embolism or heart attack. So you don't want calcium to go to your arteries. You don't want it to go to your joints, because that's associated with osteoarthritis. You also find hydroxyapatite crystals there. You don't want it to go to your kidneys, nor the vein going into the kidney, cutting off the blood supply. And you don't want it to go cause constipation or overexcite your nerves, or you don't want it to have a hypertensive effect on your heart muscle. Calcium channel blockers are a group of blood pressure lowering medication that happens to block the action of calcium on the heart muscle. So that's why in the natural field, some people believe taking magnesium supplements helps to lower blood pressure, because it has the opposite action. So calcium, as you can see, becomes a problem if it's not in the right place and perhaps of the right kind. And that's just the basic point, is that calcium is a building block, but it's also a signaling molecule. So there is a researcher from Queensland, his name is Wan Lee, who has discovered that in breast cancers you have a certain type of mechanism in the cell, the memory cell goes awry, and you get all this calcium accumulating in the breast tissue, and it signals those cells to divide. So it's a mitogen, in other words, it stimulates proliferation. So that's where you can see the linkage between calcium accumulation in the breast, proliferation, metastasis to the bone, and I've searched Medline, and there's 18 million studies there, and I've tried to find a study on, calcium supplementation and breast cancer risk. And there are a number of them out there, and very few seem to indicate that calcium supplements increase the risk of breast cancer. That may be because it does not, or maybe because the studies that showed a link weren't published, because you don't have to publish a study. But I'm still concerned. So that's something that we want to kind of get our minds around. There's also the connection with hormone insufficiency. So like, for instance, the most common form of iatrogenic or doctor or drug-caused osteoporosis is from steroids. So, prednisone. Prednisone induces osteoporosis because one of its primary roles is to inhibit collagen synthesis. And even our natural cortisol from stress will affect collagen synthesis. So when you're really stressed and your adrenal glands are producing cortisol, which in women, for instance, their ovaries are producing progesterone, the precursor molecule. When they're stressed, they're turning the progesterone into cortisol. So they have less progesterone, which is a very good thing for bones, and they have more cortisol. So then that inhibits collagen synthesis, and without adequate collagen, you can't create new bone, and you can end up with weak or less dense or porous bone through that mechanism. So it's really important for women especially to look at the connection with estrogens and their overall hormone health and the state of their bone. We'll get in a little bit into why things like flaxseed have been shown to be so beneficial for bone density. It's because they contain phytoestrogens. And in this day and age, the word estrogen is sort of like the enemy. At one point, they were touted to be the sort of elixir of immortality for women. Take your HRT, your pregnant horse urine estrogens, and you won't get osteoporosis. And it is true, estrogens do preserve the bone, but they're not selective. And unfortunately, when a young girl turns into a young woman, estrogen levels are jacked up and she develops secondary sexual characteristics. So breast tissue starts to divide and proliferate. So it may be good for your bones to have higher estrogen, it's certainly not good for your breasts, and or the endometrium, reproductive tissues generally, so you end up getting higher rates of cancer. Although the Women's Health Initiative showed it also caused higher rates of things like heart attacks. So that's different from phytoestrogens, which are technically selective estrogen receptor modulators, or SERMs. There's one sold to women right now for bones, which is Avista, which looks, quite frankly, like most medications, unfortunately I have to say this because it's true, to be very dangerous. I believe it's associated with higher rates of embolism. But the selectivity is that with phytoestrogens, including soy, you get an activation of the receptor in the bone for estrogen, whereas it blocks out estradiol in the breast tissue. And for men, it's prostate, because prostate and breast tissue is very similar in terms of risk factors for disease and even solutions. So that's the beauty of nature. And I can tell you why this is not promoted instead of Avista. It's because it's not patentable. And by the FDA definition presently, the only thing that can legally be used as a medication in this country is something the FDA approves as a drug. But since FDA approval requires millions of dollars to fund clinical trials, and no one is going to be able to get a patent to recoup their investment on a natural substance, because by FDA definition you can't get a patent on a natural substance, there's no way you'll ever be presented this as a viable option in therapy. But that has nothing to do with its viability or therapeutic activity. It has to do with profitability, because medicine in this country is for profit. It's all about proprietary formulas. The problem, though, if this was a matter of the medications that are drugs are as good or better, I wouldn't even care. You should be able to make money on things that really do work and are good for you. But because the model requires that you can't take a natural isolate of a substance to get a drug patent, but you have to tinker with it to create a proprietary, synthetic, patentable, unique substance, they have to create a poison in order to even get drug approval. So it's really quite insane. So one of the things I was able to find on Medline, which is exciting, is that there are substances like cumin, like grapefruit, like flax, like prunes, that have been shown to reverse osteoporosis. What they do is they take the little rats, the females, and they take their ovaries out, and they induce osteoporosis. That's really all it takes. And what they do is they give one group, let's say grapefruit extract, actual pulp, and they give the other group nothing. The other group, basically their bones fall apart like they would if they were getting old, and the other group, complete reversal. It's as if they had ovaries again. No difference at all. And it reverses some of the loss in strength. So that's a real important distinction. Is like we think of bone density as being equivalent to bone quality or health, when in fact the two are completely different. You can have very dense substances that are very brittle. And bone is a great example of that, because when it comes to biomechanical strength, you can't really test that with a DEXA machine. But you can do it with rats. And what you do is you measure their bone density through maybe a DEXA scan, but then you also break their bones. And the amount of pressure it takes to break the bone determines its strength. And so that's where we're at, is that we can't necessarily evaluate strength very well, which puts us in a position of not really knowing. That's where you almost have to start to regain some intimacy with your own body and get beyond allowing this really state-run, multinational, drug-based system to take possession of your body. You look at the primary illnesses that afflict Westerners today are what you call silent diseases, which you cannot yourself ascertain without dramatic, radical intervention from the outside, meaning heart disease. Primarily like with lipid analysis, you can't tell what your LDL, your HDL ratio is. With cancer, you can't tell you have cancer. You have to get that evaluated. You can't tell if you're diabetic unless you get a blood sugar rating or A1C test. All these in osteoporosis. So those four major illnesses require that we